Late night fishing. I had a teacher in high school who loved fishing with his buddy. They would go on trips all the time, so they decided to go looking for a certain type of fish that could be only found at night. They enjoyed their late night fishing and decided to head back to their cars during the night. As they headed back, they start hearing noises coming from the woods, and they start getting creeped out. Suddenly, a group of hooded figures come out of the forest and surround them in a circle. They couldn't see any of their faces. It seemed clear that they were men, though. The figures just stood there looking at them. The only time they ever moved was when one of the men tried leaving, which prompted a figure to push them back in the circle. Eventually, some feminine-looking hooded figures came out of the woods and, joined them. They all stood there for hours in complete silence, and when daylight started to appear, the figures just walked back into the woods. The men were obviously thoroughly confused and terrified, so they went to a local historian to find out what the hell that was about. The historian advised them to go back to the forest in the day. When they did, they found a bunch of animals that were cut open and had their organs taken out. I no longer enjoy fishing at night. On hot summer nights, predatory catfish are very active, and so are creepy stalkers. A few years ago, while fishing with some friends at a well-frequented but poorly lit catfishing hotspot, our night out was totally ruined by some weirdo. I was a little bit tipsy, gathering firewood. My buddy was smoking a cigarette, watching the tips of our poles for a bite. The girls had just squatted to piss nearby, and we were enjoying our little campfire. By no coincidence, a strange man calmly and almost silently walked up to our group. He came from the pitch black, as if he'd been lurking or watching us from afar. His mannerisms were very deliberate, as if he were somehow in control of the situation. My buddy gave him the cold shoulder, but I tried making nervous small talk with the stranger. I assumed he was also a fisherman, looking for information on what was biting. No, he seemed totally indifferent to any talk about fishing, and he certainly didn't sense the emotional mood of the group towards him. The girls were definitely creeped out and nervous. At an awkward lull in the conversation, the stranger pulled out a large hunting knife and rubbed his thumb across the blade in a self-soothing way. I assumed maybe he was a lonely namvet, nothing more really. Abruptly, my buddy started packing up all of our gear and turned ice cold. I remember the stranger getting a head start, leaving on foot somewhere ahead of us. I'll never forget the car ride home. My buddy and his wife explained that they had actually encountered that creep at the fishing spot before, shrugged him off with some disinterested small talk, and upon leaving for a short errand, they realized the creep followed them to the store and appeared in the aisle they were headed for. My buddy was visibly shook up by this latest encounter. It put a damper on a favorite hangout of ours, and I'm pretty sure he followed us all home that night. I read people quite well, and there was a definite subtext to the uncanny conversation I had with this guy. Looking back, it seemed like he had something welling up inside of him that he was alluding to. Perhaps a bit of self-restraint towards us, but certainly not mercy or empathy. I followed his train of thought, and it seemed like he had an air of accomplishment and physical dominance over the group. There were some other highly specific circumstantial aspects of the encounter that led me to believe that this guy was a murderer. I don't want to get into specifics, but this guy was hands down the most creepiest motherfucker I've ever met. There are several cold cases of dead or missing women within a 200-mile radius of this guy. He had all the cold mannerisms of a complete sociopath. After almost 10 years, I can't shake the feeling that if we met again, I'd be brutally murdered. Creepy guy while fishing. I regularly fish off a small jetty on the river, where I live with a friend. On this particular day, I went on my own as my mate was working. When I arrive, I see a young girl. I later found out that she's 14, sitting on the jetty. So I decide to fish off of the beach so as to not make her feel uncomfortable. But she waves me over onto the jetty anyways. Apparently, she had seen me fish off there before and wanted some company. As I'm setting my gear up, this guy in a uniform walks up onto the jetty wearing what looks like a police uniform and starts talking to the girl in an official manner about someone who had been riding their dirt bike on the park grass, talking about apprehending him, etc. From the get-go, I can tell there's something not quite right about this guy. A closer look at his uniform tells me he isn't actually a police officer, and his uniform in fact appears to be a Marine SES, State Emergency Service uniform. My friend arrives, and his conversation with the girl is turning out to be unintentionally hilarious. This is where I bring out my phone and start recording a video. The conversation turns more and more inappropriate, with my friend and I making a point to not interact with him outside of a couple remarks. At one point, after the guy on the dirt bike came back, and this guy, we'll call him Marine Officer Badass, Mob for short, tried to apprehend him, only to be told to go get fucked, cunt. Mob returns and appears to call the local police and file a report, throwing in bullshit claims of the guy doing various things, all of which never happened, and the guy just peacefully drove away. Then, suddenly, the guy decides that he wants to fish as well. Off he goes on his little push bike. Meanwhile, the girl chats with us and makes it clear that she is creeped out by the guy. When he returns in his, quote, official clothes, he proceeds to sit very close to the girl and fish with her. All the while, she's making very audible hints that she doesn't feel safe with him, such as talking to my friend and I, please don't leave me alone here. The real creepy part is when she decided to leave. He also decided to leave, and seemed to be of the impression that they would walk home together. She, of course, stuck around and talked to us, while he awkwardly and painfully slowly started walking his bike off and looking back regularly, even stopping at times and staring at us. Obviously, this wasn't going to turn well if we let her walk home alone, so we decide to walk her home and keep her safe from this guy. As we're parting ways at the end of her street, she gets a phone call from her mother. Apparently, while her back was turned, had gone through her phone and taken her mom's number, and has now called her mom and told her that her daughter is walking home with 2 pedophiles. What the fuck? Turns out this guy is not with the SES and just dresses up like that to feel important or something. I ended up posting this video to Facebook and find out that this guy was caught with fireworks and explosives on his porch, which exploded while a group of children were there, causing a young girl to be burnt severely. The fact that this guy was so brazen about hitting on this girl right in front of us makes me think that he might actually done this with other girls as well. Very worrying. So much so that we make it a point to go fishing even though we're not too keen on it, so that girl doesn't get bloody raped or something. Her parents don't seem to be the greatest. Sorry if this really isn't Let's Not Meet worthy, but it's an ongoing saga, and I will update as we get more creepy stuff. Night fishing. Around 10 p.m. one night, I was at the river with my boyfriend just hanging out with him while he fished. We were the only people left there that late. There was no noise other than the sound of the water. So when we started to hear voices coming from around a bend in the trail, we noticed it right away. We both kind of stopped and looked towards the sound, but it was dark and the trail curved, so we couldn't see anything. The voices slowly got louder, and we started to also hear the beating of what sounded like a drum. We were trying to laugh it off, but we had stopped talking for the most part and kept watching the bend in the trail. We both knew that there was only one entrance and only one exit. They were the same. The park closed at dark, and we weren't actually supposed to be there, but this was kind of our spot, and we never ever saw other people there that late. We started seeing the flicker of a fire and a group of people come around the bend carrying torches. I'm starting to get seriously weirded out now. I'm pretty bad at judging distances, but the people were far enough away that we could just barely make out some words they were saying, and I felt like they had not noticed us. The words we could make out were things like God, obey, master, and other religious stuff. We started quietly discussing what this could be. A religious cult? What should we do? If we moved to walk away from them, it might attract their attention, and we would only be walking farther away from the exit. Was there any reason to do anything at all? We had no real reason to feel threatened, but we were uneasy anyways. Suddenly, they all turned and started moving towards us. As they got closer, I could hear the leader more clearly. He was leading a group of people who were all tied together at the waist and telling them if they were good and listened to the master, they wouldn't get whooped. It was a slave reenactment. We were in Richmond, Virginia, on what is clearly marked as a historic slave trail. They passed us by with no incident, and we laughed at ourselves for being dumb. The end.